Someone help me! The female pixie screamed into the dark night, unaware that her calls would go unheard. She screamed again, in the grips of pure panic as she began to feel the weird winds pull at her, almost seeming to drag the pixie back, making her movements sluggish as she tried to run. With the last ounce of her strength, she ripped herself away from the unseen grasp of her pursuer. Please, help me! She barely managed to whimper out before taking a desperate and fatal turn into an alley wreathed in shadows. One last attempt to hide. The pixie crouched behind the piles of trash and tried to catch her breath. She knew there was nowhere she could go. Not anymore. Her wings had been crippled when the winds first found her walking alone, and they had found her again. She watched in horror as the detritus gathered on the alley floor began to whip wildly around. The woman tried to scream one last time, but the scream itself was pulled from her lungs, along with her final breath. The great pixie city of Firefly lit the night with the enchanting glow coming from the miniature lanterns that adorned the towering mushroom buildings, each one a different and vibrant color. The fireflies themselves flitted around lazily as usual, resembling the light of the stars above. The city was alive tonight, the streets and the air filled with the pixie population. Some were finishing up the last of their daily tasks. Others stumbled about after consuming too much cider, and many more were just getting started. Yet one pixie among the rest stood out. He was not here for fun. He was here for business. His appearance was not colorful or flamboyant like the rest. He wore black clothing, a long jacket, and dark pants. His hair, the color of jet, unkempt, refusing to be tamed. The pixie's eyes were a brilliant blue against the glow of the lanterns. His beard, recently shaved, gave way to stubborn stubble. The pixie's cerulean wings flicked back and forth as he weaved in between the rising stacks of the mushroom buildings and carefully landed on the pebble-lined streets. He quickly stepped out of the way as a squirrel carriage barreled towards him. "Watch out!" the driver yelled as he shot past. The pixie ignored him. Instead, he focused on the taped-off alleyway ahead. A uniformed officer lifted the tape. "Detective?" he said to the pixie, acknowledging his rank as he walked by. When he reached the other pixie police investigating the scene, one turned and gave him a nod. "Rush. Good. You're here." Detective Rush reached out and shook the hand of his old friend, Tiptoes, before turning his attention to the body under the dark blue cover. The blood, sparkling with the small traces of pixie dust, had pooled from underneath one side and wound its way around the pebbles below, like tiny crimson rivers. "What do we have here?" the detective asked as he crouched down to look at the surrounding area. "Female, 123 years old. Name, Bluebell. Was last seen leaving the stampede. Cider in her blood. Pouch full of amber. Killer wasn't looking for riches. Jewelry left behind, too. But Rush, there was something that had been removed." As Tiptoes said this, Rush pulled back the cover. His breath hitched. Her flesh was blue as her name. Her torso crushed. Her wings gone. The realization hit the detective hard, and he swallowed before opening his mouth. "It's him. Mr. Dust. He's back." Tiptoes let out a slow breath. 3 years this time. Longest he's gone. If his pattern holds, we have until sunrise to catch him before he goes underground. 1 night, 3 victims. "We need to stop him at all costs." "This can't happen tonight, Rush! Not tonight!" The shrill voice sent an immediate spike of irritation through Rush's skull. Mayor Skyrider pushed past the officers, her face twisted in frustration. The Acorn Festival? Really? Of all nights for this bird shit? A woman just died, Sky, Rush told the mayor before letting her continue ranting. Oh yes, boo-hoo, so sad. And 2 more are going to die as well. Just like always, because of your inability to do your job. Get your shit together, Rush! Find and stop this killer before he strikes again. I will not have this night ruined. After all the amber I sunk into this festival. She stepped closer, her voice low and venomous. I swear by the spores, if Mr. Dust is not in a jail cell by the end of the night, I will have your badge! She turned on her heel, shoving the crowd aside as she launched herself into the air. Who the hell voted for her? Tiptoes asked Rush when she was out of earshot. Rush ignored this question and continued to stare at the face of Mr. Dust's first victim of the night. She was young, was beautiful, but death never leaves a beautiful corpse. Her appearance, her style of clothing, she reminded him of his wife before she... Rush shook his head and stood quickly, but as he did, the pixie became lightheaded. His body began to sway. Whoa, Rush, you okay? Tiptoes asked his friend as he reached out to help steady him. You been hitting the cider tonight there, bud? Obviously not. Sorry, just been feeling a bit off today. My mind's been a bit cloudy. Been finding it hard to concentrate lately. Rush told him and stood straight. I'm okay. Are you? I mean, look at your face. Tiptoes pointed at a nearby window. Rush, slightly concerned, turned and took a long look at himself. Nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary. What are you talking about, Tip? The detective asked. I mean, you're just so ugly. Rush slowly turned and his eyes narrowed at his friend, who was now forcing a goofy face, and then spoke with an even goofier voice. You look like this! You son of a cockroach. Rush gave himself permission to laugh before reeling himself back to the scene of the crime. Seriously though, Tip, we need to catch him this time. This isn't about my badge anymore. I don't care about that. I'd gladly give it up if it meant catching this monster. How, though? Tiptoes replied. There's never been enough evidence to give us any concrete leads. Never any footprints, never any sightings, no witnesses. It's always been the perfect execution. As if the killer were made of air. Rush glanced back at the pixie corpse again, before slowly ascending into the sky along with Tiptoes. They both landed on the top of the spotted mushroom cap and gazed over the city that stretched far into the horizon. Rush imagined the lights going out one by one until the city darkened. He imagined this monster breaking into all these homes in the dead of night, silently suffocating each pixie inside, until there was not one left. This monster, who had haunted not just his dreams, but the dreams of every child growing up over the past 200 years. I honestly have no clue how we're going to pull this off, Tip. I really don't. But we have to stop him. Tonight. There was only a handful of dependable shreds of information that they could utilize. Number 1. Mr. Dust always took 3 victims every night when he killed. Number 2. The ribs were always crushed and their lungs collapsed, as if the air had been pulled from them by some great monster with a powerful grip. Yet no trolls had ever been spotted in the city. Number 3. Their wings were always carefully removed, despite the contrast of their death. Obviously for the pixie dust they contained. Number 4. The killings always took place in Southside. The poor suffered, while the rich north of the Sweetwater remained untouched. Rush always felt a small and maybe unwarranted feeling of guilt and shame when he thought about his childhood growing up north. One of the reasons he moved to the south side. One of them. Rush and Tiptoes sat in the coffee shop as they went over the evidence of every case before, reminding themselves they had to work quickly. The detective took a sip of his maple-flavored coffee before setting the cup down and slowly began to rub his temples. He let out a low groan of discomfort as another wave of fog rolled across his mind. "Rush?" Tiptoes asked him and patted the table in front of him. "You still here?" The detective gave a forced smile and looked back at his friend with tired eyes. "Always. Unfortunately." He glanced out at the street filled with colorfully dressed pixies. They were loud and obnoxious as they stormed the streets on their way to the festival, some of them already far too inebriated. One pixie, flying crooked, smacked into a low-hanging sign of a shop across the street. He fell into the crowd below, which of course did not take that well, and a fight began to break out. "Should we do anything about that?" Tiptoes asked before Rush made an annoyed face. "Hell no. That's not our problem tonight." Rush snorted and they both chuckled, before the fight grew big enough to where Rush finally had to tap on the window loud enough to get their attention. He held up his hand and flared up a magical spell that gave off an eye-catching cerulean glow. "Don't make me come out there and use this spell. I don't remember if it immobilizes or vaporizes. Care to find out?" The pixies quickly stopped fighting and began moving with the rest of the crowd. The two pixie police chuckled and finished their drinks. "Who's paying this time?" Tiptoes asked as he reached for his pouch, but stopped. Rush shrugged. "Not me. I did last time. Plus, I don't have my pouch on me. And my head, everything's so muddled. I don't remember where I put it." Rush feigned confusion with a dramatic flair, smiling as Tiptoes mumbled something under his breath and removed 2 amber chunks. "Oh, that's so kind of you, Tip. Thanks. Thanks for the tip." Yeah. The two of them stepped out into the street and drifted up above the crowd to avoid the congestion. They began to fly towards the stampede to double-check for any information that might be useful in their case. There must have been thousands of pixies that took to the air tonight, which made the traffic more difficult than usual to navigate. Eventually, the two friends reached their destination and strolled through the front doors. The stampede was packed. Rush and Tiptoes were struggling so much to reach the front desk that they had to resort to flashing their badges to get the crowd to move out of their way. Rush flinched when Tiptoes accidentally smacked him in the face to get his attention. Rush opened his mouth to complain, but Tiptoes was clearly distracted by something. "Holy hell. Rush, look. It's Nova Starlight!" He screamed over the music. "It's actually her!" Rush turned his eyes to the stage shrouded by magical fog. At first, it was just her silhouette, but then, sure enough, the most famous singer in the Pixie Kingdom stepped into the flashing rainbow lights that cast the entire room in a nearly overwhelming display of radiancy. Her light blue hair was tied up into 2 buns with glittering braids, while a couple of long silver-streaked locks fell from either side of her face. Her wings were a beautiful rainbow color, and her dust reflected the many flashing lights around her. Then, she began to sing. Tiptoes let out an excited cheer. "I love you!" "Oh, shit!" Rush exclaimed. "No wonder the mayor's pissed. Booking her alone was probably a small fortune." The detective looked over to his friend, whose eyes were glued to the stage. Rush knew he was a huge fan of hers, but seeing his reaction, he clearly underestimated just how much. Rush had to pull Tiptoes away from the show, much to Tip's dismay, and physically drag him back to the front. "You can get her autograph later." The bartender looked up at them when they eventually reached the bar and began to shake his head. "I told you all everything I know. Please leave me and the rest of my customers alone tonight." He shouted over the noise and went back to serving his patrons.
"We just want to make sure we didn't overlook anything,"
Tiptoes shouted back to catch the attention of the bartender again.
"Anything else you could tell us would be much appreciated. Don't you want to help us put Mr. Dust behind bars tonight?"
Along with the bartender, several other patrons began to laugh.
"Mr. Dust will never be caught. No one will ever come close,"
one of the pixies at the bar said, before turning to face the pixie police.
"There's a reason he's a legend. There's a reason there's a curfew most nights. There's a reason his name is used to scare children into behaving. All you can do is be careful, follow the rules, and pray to the spores that you aren't one of his next victims."
Rush opened his mouth to protest, but a ringing caught his attention. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his communication disc. He motioned for Tiptoes and pointed at the device, holding up one finger to tell his friend he would return. "Hold on a second, Marshmallow. I can't hear you. Let me step outside," Rush told his sister. He had to push his way through the crowd once more to reach the doors and cursed under his breath as he tripped over a drunkard stepping outside. "Shit! Sorry about that, mate. Now, what's going on?"
"Rush, are you out partying? Please tell me you're not drinking again,"
Marshmallow asked, concerned. He understood why. He had once had a bit of a cider problem. No, of course not. We're just having a bit of a busy night tonight, obviously."
"You said you were going to make it over to Father's tonight for dinner. Remember?"
"Oh, shit. Yeah. Yeah, I forgot. I'm sorry, but I can't make it tonight. It's not just the festival. Look, I just can't make it. Plus, it's not like it's gonna matter. He never wants me there anyways." There was a long pause.
"I wish you'd try. Rush, you know he feels bad about the way things went down after Dove. I know the vibe feels a bit different, but please, if you can make it sometime tonight, I'd really appreciate it."
I promise. I'll try harder in the future. But tonight, I can't.
"Okay, Rush. We'll see you next time. I love you."
Love you too, sis. Again, I'm sorry. Marshmallow hadn't even heard the last part of the message due to her ending the call before he could finish speaking. Damn it.
"What is it?"
Tiptoes asked as he came up from behind Rush. It's just... Marshmallow's still trying to get me and my father to sit down and talk. Trying to get the whole family together again. Bless her heart. Rush stared at the disc for a long time, before pocketing it again. A sudden shift in Rush's vision caused him to sway and stagger to the side. The detective nearly collapsed into the wall, but caught himself with one hand. "Hey!" Tiptoes exclaimed loudly. "Seriously, I think you may need a break. Maybe you let us deal with this tonight." Rush shook his head. No, it's not going to do any good. I might as well try if my badge is on the line. I may lose it either way, but I at least want to try it one last time. Tiptoes gave his friend an inquisitive look before finally submitting. "Okay, Rush. Let's finish this," Tiptoes said to him, before another voice interrupted them.
"Pardon me. I couldn't help but overhear you when you were talking inside at the bar. You were asking about Blue Bunny, right?"
The stranger asked the two pixie police. They both gave the swaying man a judgmental stare before proceeding with a response. "Blue Bell. And yes, we were." "Why, do you have some information for us, Mr. Tiptoes asked the drunk man. He brushed his hair back and tried to stand as straight as possible.
Bobo. And... yeah, I seen something. Hard not to notice a pretty face like hers. She had a few drinks, which I guess you already know, and went out and took an early night, I guess. Excuse me. Went out the back door. I was out there taking a piss and saw her leaving. She went down Wormway and looked like she was turning to go up Rust Lane. But here's the thing. The wind, man.
The cider must have been hitting strong for poor old Bobo, for the man's thoughts seemed to stray for a long moment, giving the two pixie police enough time to flash each other a glance. "What about the wind?" Rush asked and snapped his fingers to regain the attention of Bobo before the cider took what was left of his fleeting mind.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was weird, man. Like it came rolling up from behind me. Knocked me off my feet. I looked back up and it was like it was chasing after her. Watched the street trash get carried away and took the same path as poor old Blue Bunny.
Bluebell.
Who?
Rush and Tiptoes held back an amused smile. "So, you're saying that the wind was chasing her?" Unfortunately, he didn't get a response before Bobo's constitution reached its limit, and the pixie face planted into the ground with a hard thud. Ouch. Rush placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. "What is it? You got that look. Like you've figured something out." "Tip, you said earlier that it was like the killer was made of air. What if he is?" "Wait. You mean like one of the living elements?" Yeah, what if it is? What if that's exactly why no one can ever catch Mr. Dust? What if it's not a tangible foe at all? But why would a living element be after pixie dust? That doesn't make sense. They don't have a mind. Well, at least not one that we can understand. What if someone is controlling one somehow? What if the killer has never had to get their hands dirty before? Tiptoe's eyes slowly widened at that reveal. By the spores. You might be onto something. I know, right? Well then, what do we do next? Rush thought for a moment before glancing down at Bobo laying on the ground. A sly smile appeared on the detective's face. What you got, Rush? A plan. A very stupid plan that just might work. Rush silently watched from the shadows of the empty alley, remaining as still as possible. His hiding place was perfect. There was no way anyone could spot him, even if they were looking directly at him. Tiptoes came around the corner, right on time, stumbling as if drunk on cider. "Oh, wow!" Tiptoes shouted out loud as possible, for all the world to hear. "I'm just so very drunk. I should not have gotten so drunk, and all by myself tonight. That is also a sign of alcoholism. Anyways, I am all alone, and so very drunk. By the spores. I sure hope nothing happens to me tonight, because I am, as previously mentioned, so drunk." Tiptoe's horrible acting caused Rush to pinch the bridge of his nose and groan at the cringy performance. "Pull it back some, Tip. No one's going to believe that."
Oh, I think I'm going to pass out now, because I am so very drunk. Good night, world. Oh, happy Acorn Festival.
Tiptoes finally collapsed and lay as still as possible. Rush breathed a sigh of relief. Glad that the show was over now. All they had to do now was wait. And wait. Several minutes passed. Tiptoes even lifted his head to look around at one moment, before placing it back on the cold Pebblestone road. 10 more minutes passed. And then, just as Rush was about to reveal himself, the wind began to pick up. Rush remained still, his blue eyes watching the piece of trash to his right slowly move across the ground. Jerky movements at first, as if testing the peculiar scene. And then it began to crawl towards Tiptoes. Rush could feel the breeze stirring his hair as he stared ahead. The weird winds began to circle Tiptoes. Now, Rush thought to himself, but his mind suddenly crippled him. He could feel himself become lightheaded, and before he knew it, the detective fell to the ground with a crash as he brought down the trash cans with him. He could not see what happened next as his vision betrayed him, filling with stars and bright colors. "Rush! Rush, help!" Tiptoes yelled out to Rush, begging his friend for help. "Help me!" Rush struggled to stand to his feet and violently shook his head before charging up a spell. From his hands poured a brilliant cerulean light that rolled away like smoke. The pixie aimed his spell and let it loose, but the strong winds pushed his arm to the side, causing the spell to blast a hole in the wall of the mushroom building. Rush tried to run forward to help, but the weird winds pushed him back, refusing to let him get close. "Tip!" Rush screamed out and watched in horror as his friend was lifted off the ground. He could see Tiptoes grasping his throat as if something was choking him, and his legs kicked violently. Rush tried again and again to blast the invisible monster, but the wind kept redirecting his spells. The detective had to watch as the air was pulled from Tiptoes' lungs, and his ribs were crushed with sickening sounds that echoed along the empty and dark alley. "No!" His friend's body dropped to the ground, yet his wings remained, dangling in the space above his corpse. The air wrapped itself around in a whirling cocoon of wind, and two glowing eyes flashed once before turning away. The creature rose into the night sky above and vanished. Rush, now able to move, collapsed to the ground. He slowly crawled forward to his dead friend. He failed him. He promised Tiptoes that he would watch out for him, that he would protect him. But he failed. Rush was about to open his mouth to scream, to finally surrender, when the sparkling dust floating down through the air caught his eye. The remnants of Tiptoes' pixie dust seemed to create a trail of sorts through the air. Without hesitation, Rush followed it. He flew in between the traffic of pixies and fireflies as he chased the dust, losing the breadcrumbs occasionally, but there was always just enough to keep him going. It led him to the north side. Makes sense the killer would be here, he thought to himself. But when he saw where the trail ended, no. There's no way. No. Rush landed lightly, but with a heavy heart. He looked down at the small pile of pixie dust that had gathered and slowly reached down to pick up a pinch of it with his 2 fingers and thumb. He continued, walked up the steps of the home. No. Please, no. He turned the doorknob and stepped into his father's alchemy shop.
Rush!
His sister, Marshmallow, reacted with much surprise at his arrival.
You made it!
Rush gave a half-fake, half-real smile when he saw his sister, who quickly stood and ran over to him. He returned her hug. His eyes slowly drifted up to look at his father. The elderly pixie sat in his favorite chair at the end of the dining table. His 2 different colored eyes, one blue, one black and orange, due to an alchemical accident, stared at his son, unblinking. He wore extravagant clothing as usual, many jeweled rings, and fiddled with his fancy wooden cane sword with one hand. The dancing animatronic he used as an assistant flew back and forth from one shoulder to the other. Father, Rush coldly but calmly greeted and pulled away from his sister.
Son.
His father's voice was resonant, articulate, as if always in deep thought, calculating every word, every movement, every moment. Rush looked back into his sister's silver eyes. Marshmallow, I know you are wanting a family night, but do you mind giving Father and I some time to talk? There are some things I would like to say to him, and I think it's better if we talk alone. His sister stared back, slightly disappointed, but still understanding. She nodded.
If this is what it takes for you 2 to hash this out, then take all the time you need.
She gave her brother a peck on the cheek and a quick wave to her father before leaving.
No fighting, you 2.
Rush felt his heart drop when she said that. He waited for the door to close. And long after, he stared at his father, and he stared back. The only sound, the rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner.
You look terrible. Go on then. What is it you have to say to me?
Rush didn't say a word, but instead slowly walked over to his father's side of the room. He sprinkled Tiptoe's pixie dust onto the table in front of his father. The old man's eyes showed no signs of recognition or remorse, but Rush knew that he knew. I didn't see it because I didn't want to. The detective spoke aloud after a long pause. His father continued to stare back into his son's eyes. The seconds ticked away on the clock, and yet the moment seemed to last forever. His father finally opened his mouth to speak, but his words took Rush by surprise.
I love you, son.
Rush stood still, swaying slightly when the fog threatened to cloud his mind again. Yet this time, he powered through. He felt awkward, but he needed to say this next part, and then arrest his father. Arrest Mr. Dust. I love you too! Rush started to respond, but was suddenly launched to the other side of the room, and his body slammed into the wall. He felt the air leave his lungs from the impact and dropped to the ground. The pixie detective tried to stand, but was immediately slammed into the wall again, this time landing on his feet. He tried to move forward, yet the invisible force from the weird winds that had suddenly been conjured into existence threw him into the wall a third time. He tried to open his mouth to speak, to yell out in hopes his sister had not wandered too far, but his voice could not be found. He struggled against the wall and tried to kick out at the unseen attacker, but of course his feet found no solid object to hit. Rush's panicked eyes glanced over at his father, who refused to even look at him. The old pixie took a sip from his tea, and after placing it back on the table, slowly rose. Rush could feel the air being pulled from his lungs, and in one last desperate effort, released his throat and sent forth a powerful blast that rippled through the air, causing the kitchen table and everything on it to be thrown backwards across the room. There was a horrific screech as the living element recoiled from the magical damage and released its grip on the pixie detective. Rush dropped to the ground, desperately gasping for air, and looked forward as the wind came back at him again. Its glowing blue eyes filled with fury. He lifted his hands and sent out blast after blast of cerulean color that filled the room with bright flashes that could be seen from outside. The weird winds shrieked with each impact, twisting violently, before vanishing in front of his eyes. Rush took several deep breaths and rose to his feet. He turned to face his father. The blade pierced through Rush's stomach and out through his back. The whole world seemed to go quiet. He stared up into his father's eyes. Such cold eyes, the detective thought to himself. The eyes of a killer. How did I never see it? His father pulled the blade away, cleanly and quickly. He took a step back. He watched his wounded son stagger around. How could you? Rush asked his father after a painful moment passed. How could you do this to your own kind? Mr. Dust continued to stare at his son. Always so quiet, so calm.
When you understand the power that pixie dust holds, you understand my work is what has kept this family alive and thriving. Not only does it enhance the potency of potions, it also keeps one full of vitality and youth. Do you know how old I am, son?
Rush continued to sway from the blood loss and struggled to remain standing.
I am well over 1,000 years old. I have seen lands far beyond anything these pixies could ever imagine. I was here when this city was built. I have been doing this for longer than my name has been used as a monster in the shadows of Firefly. Anytime someone has gotten close to discovering my secret, I have had to silence them. And not one time have I ever gotten my hands bloody. Not once. Not until now. To kill my own son. There's a special place in hell for people like that. But I'll never see it.
What? You think you're above death? Everyone dies, Father. No matter how far you run. No matter how long. Time will catch up to you. And so will your sins.
My sins are many. More than anyone in this city. Yet I have never regretted them. Not once. Each one was for a greater good. Each one for the benefit of this family. Even if I act a little selfishly at times. I will never pay for what happened to your wife.
Rush felt his heart skip a beat, and his feet locked into place. In this moment, he felt grounded. His father's cold stare bore into his soul. Did you kill my wife? Did you kill my dove?
She figured me out. Found the stash of dust I kept in the back room when you two were still living here. Well, she'd made me do it. Well, not me per se. I let the winds have her. It was quick, I promise. She felt no pain. To this day, I've never used her dust. No matter how much I wanted to.
Rush began to tremble with bottled up rage he did not know he still had contained within him. You monster! Rush screamed and drew his rapier. His father kicked one of the chairs into his son's path, causing him to fall over when he tried to lunge forward. Mr. Dust walked over to the other side of the room and gave his son the time he needed to get back up to his feet. Blood spilled from his wound, causing his grip on the sword to weaken and his vision blurred.
I thought the grief would keep you away from your work, from looking for me. That did not yield the results I preferred. I tried poison. Not enough to kill you, but enough to make you unfit for duty. I do not want to kill you, son, but you leave me no other options. I'm going to tell them a story. That some drunk pixies broke into the shop, tried to harass me and rob me of my wealth, and that my son fought valiantly to save me, but unfortunately succumbed to his wounds. You'll be a hero, just like you always wanted.
The father and son continued to circle each other with their weapons raised. I wanted to be the one known for catching Mr. Dust, for catching you. His father shrugged.
Unfortunate. That'll never come to pass. You cannot beat me, Rush. My blade is more powerful than you can imagine. Your puny metal will shatter the second our blades clash. Yet another benefit of pixie dust. When forged with gold, they become an incredibly strong, potent item. I wield the strongest blade the city has ever dreamed of.
If you're going to kill me, then do it already. Come at me, Father. Kill your son. Fight me. Fight me!
What would be the point of it? I've always been the better swordsman. You've never even landed a scratch on me. Not once. Give up. Lay down your sword, son. I promise to you the same quick and painless death I promised Dove.
Rush finally snapped when his wife's name was mentioned and fired 2 powerful blasts of magical energy at his father, who absorbed them into the sparkling golden blade. His smile told Rush how futile his efforts were. The detective, weak, finally felt his legs give out, and he fell to his knees. The rapier rolled away from him, his eyes filled with tears, and the pixie stared at the wooden floor, listening to the approaching footsteps of his father. He did not even want to look at him anymore. "Just do it already," Rush whispered, fully surrendering to his fate. He could see the shadow of his father raising the sword above his head.
Dust to dust, son.
The sudden sound of the front door opening gave pause to the moment.
I'm sorry, I forgot my... What happened in here?
Rush could barely hear Marshmallow's voice over the throbbing in his ears. He gave a quick glance up to see his sister standing in the doorway, shock covering her face. Rush took advantage of this moment. He picked up the rapier and stabbed up through his father's wrist, causing the old pixie to let out a yell and drop the enchanted sword, which landed in his son's waiting hand. Rush stood and plunged the blade up through his father's stomach at a wicked angle, piercing multiple vital organs, including the beating heart of Mr. Dust. His father's eyes widened in shock, and his mouth fell open. No sound able to escape. "Dust to dust, Father." Rush ripped the blade free and stepped to the side, allowing Mr. Dust to drop to the ground. The sound of the ticking clock and the intense pounding in Rush's ears dominated his reality. Both heartbeat and clock in perfect harmony. Rush didn't even feel anything as his sister's traumatic screams filled the home. He stared down and watched her cradle their father in her arms. She sounded like a wounded animal. Shimmering tears dripped from her red eyes, wide and unblinking, as she stared up at her brother.
What have you done? What have you done?
Rush knew, in time, he would feel this. He did not know if his sister would ever forgive him. He did not worry about this now. He watched the weird and weakened winds move through the home, carrying the glittering remains of Mr. Dust out the door and into the night air, twinkling like the stars in the heavens above.